This paper seeks your endorsement of my decision to establish sector and advisory panels. I've asked Councillor Ferry to lead on this, and she's done a good job, I like to say. I'm looking forward to seeing how the panels contribute to our decisions, and I'm happy to review them in 12 months to see if they are working. The one significant change I made was to introduce a local business forum. This will bring together the local business organisations, especially the BIDs, and also those ones like Sandringham who've never got round to being a BID but should have, and other business associations, and a focus will be on resisting crime and handling the difficult trading year ahead of us. I'll ask Councillor Ferry first if she has anything to add by way of an introduction, and then we'll go to our staff. Councillor Ferry.
Thank you, and thank you for your kind words. I think I'll just take the report as read from my perspective, but I did just want to thank Victoria in particular, who has prepared some really good information, and we've had some very fruitful discussions. I would just point out to councillors that there is still some work to do on shaping up what these exactly are going to look like, building on success from the last term and the lessons learned as well. So there is still some time to shape what they're actually going to, the format and how they'll work precisely. But this is what we need to do now to get that process started. So I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Sorry. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I actually don't think I need to add anything more after those two comments, except perhaps to note that at this point, we didn't recommend the re-establishment of the Heritage Advisory Panel, and I've had subsequent questions since this agenda has come out, so I'd just like to address that. So at this point in the formal and legal process around Plan Change 78, which is the key focus of our heritage team, there isn't an additional role for the panel, as they have already provided advice. Ongoing engagement with members of the heritage community is important and valued, and can continue through a variety of channels, but setting up an official body and an advisory panel wasn't recommended by staff, so I thought I'd just add that in. And then also just to note, there's two changes in the Rural Advisory Panel updated terms of reference, which they haven't been attached to this report. So that is to change move meetings from 2 monthly to quarterly, and an amendment to note that there's responsibility on each panel member to report the key discussion points and decisions back to their respective organisations. So apologies for that error, and they've been sent through to Sandra, and they'll be correct on the minutes of this report. Happy to take any questions.
Councillor Walker's busting to ask about this, but I was going to suggest it to him that maybe a portfolio holder position for a person like him would be really good, but we'll find out how we go. I know he's interested in it, although he comes from an area where there are no old buildings. Just old people.
I did send some information to the Mayor via Mr Hardy around the Heritage panel. I'd just make the observation that the Heritage panel itself has not been consulted about this, as far as I know. I certainly hadn't been consulted other than a comment from Mr Hardy. As compared to any of the other panels, perhaps with the exception of the City Centre Advisory Panel, the Heritage Panel is a composition of experts in relative fields, landscape architecture, heritage architecture, I could go on. They only meet quarterly. The cost is actually quite nominal. We're at a time right now where a significant amount of Auckland's heritage is being destroyed. If ever there was an issue that attracted widespread submissions, both in respect of number but also quality, it was around the loss of heritage in Auckland. And yes, you are right, there is a plan change being advanced that was foisted on us by the government, not by us, And if ever there was a time to bring together people in the heritage community to coalesce, to provide some information to council, both around scheduled buildings, which they provide information to us about, of which there are many in Auckland, some of which are owned by council, and other buildings like the old theatre across the road and so on. If ever there was a time for council to receive some advice from a sounding board, that is now. So I'm quite happy to document this, Mr. Mayor. I do think it's incredibly remiss that we would not even consult with a panel prior to making a decision. And I would suggest that we would have not done that with the Disability Panel, the Pacific Peoples Panel, the Rainbow, the Youth, the Ethnic, the Seniors, the City Centre, or the Rural Advisory Panel. And I would put some question marks over those panels, frankly, in terms of what they contribute in terms of expert information to this council, but I don't want to go there. So I would urge you to reconsider, Mr. Mayor, and I'm happy to provide more information, and I'm sure that the heritage community in Auckland would be more than happy to do that. Thank you.
Okay, I hear that. I've had they're always badgering me as well, because I live in an area where there are old buildings. Councillor Fully, and then Councillor Lee.
Kia ora, thank you, Chair, and thank you, team, for your work on that, and Councillor Ferry as well. I just had a question about the terms of reference in attachment A, in the purpose part, and I'm just reflecting on when I was on the local board and we used to wonder why we weren't able to connect to the advisory panels, or why, and what was our role in terms of the advisory panels. And I would like to see us add local boards in there, so provide advice to the governing body, local boards and council staff, if that's possible. Or was that thought about, or is there a reason why that hasn't been put in there? Okay, that's my first question, and then I've got another one about timeframes as well. Kia ora.
Through the chair, thank you for that question. There is opportunity, and we will be looking to extend it this term to engage with local boards, but in general, the panels, the mayor's panels, to advise the mayor, the governing body, the organisations and CCOs on regional strategies and plans. So that's the reason for that broad regional brief.
Thank you.
That might be something that can come up when I meet the chairs of the local bodies, because I also have raised with them their interaction with the BIDs, and also pointing out that some of those have got large sums of money sitting there unused. So raise that then, and please come with me when we do that. Okay?
If I could just add to that there, and Councillor Foley, it's something I'm quite aware of, being ex-local board as well. In the second term, when I was first a chair of a local board, I actually tried to go to most of the advisory panel meetings to watch and learn, and at that time they largely weren't that interested in engaging much with the local board person. They didn't mind me being there, but they were very much operating in the regional space. That may no longer be the case, and I think that is something that we can keep talking about. But to a large extent, it's probably going to be determined a little bit by what the panels wish to focus on, and whether they have the capacity to deal with 21 local boards as well. So I'm just mindful of that, but definitely keep conversation going, if that's right, Mr. Mayor.
Kia ora, thank you. And my second question was just around timeframes. Do we have an idea of when those expressions of interest will go out, or?
Through the chair, thank you. We were looking to, in terms of the recruitment process, start advertising in January, and so seeking expressions of interest from then.
Although the local boards are not, in the purpose or anything, but I think that our local boards are quite useful at disseminating that kind of information, especially to our communities that don't traditionally engage with council. So, I think that's a good way to work with our local boards. Kia ora. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you very much for that. The irrepressible Michael Lee.
Mr. Mayor, I would like to support Councillor Walker in raising the need I believe, of a Heritage Advisory Panel. The Heritage Advisory Panel made major contributions, especially to the first Auckland plan, and I think it would send a good signal to our community that we are not shutting down the Heritage Advisory Panel, but we recognise the importance of heritage and the people in the community who are not necessarily politicians who can make a contribution. I chaired it for 6 years, and I think it's worthwhile. Mayor Len Brown appointed me the chair of the first Ethnic Advisory Panel, and after about a month in that role, I realised there was, at that time, with appointments and so on, quite a lot of politics going on. And I thought, well...
Quite a lot of ethnic involvement too.
I had quite a few responsibilities at that time, so I approached another councillor and asked him would he be interested. And this person was extremely enthusiastic about taking on that role. So then I approached Mayor Brown and one of his aides and told him that I'd like to share that role, give that role over. And the young aide, Connor Roberts, said to me, "But your wife is Chinese." And I said to him, "Connor, the Chinese think we white people are ethnic." So I'll leave it at that.
They're getting better. Alf Filipina, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just a short question. The setup of the panels, is that through statute or is that through just standard orders in council?
Through the Mayor, thanks for that question. So under Section 9 of the Local Government Auckland Council Act, the Mayor has the powers, the role and the responsibility to set up processes and mechanisms to engage with the people of Auckland. And the Act even gives a couple of examples. It could be a geographic, a cultural, or a regional group, a cultural group. So we've had a number of these panels since predating amalgamation and since. So that's the statutory aspect of the role, and that these panels are a manifestation of that compliance with the legislation, but they're also just through precedent and ongoing commitment of various council governing bodies, a way that we engage with, hear from a large percentage of diverse communities and different communities of interest in Tamaki.
And just supplement your last question, Your Worship, if there's any change to that, will it need legislative change, or can His Worship the Mayor change who they advise with and to?
So through the chair, it's actually up to the Mayor in terms of which mechanisms they would like to set up. So we use advisory panels as that mechanism, but it could be other mechanisms, and that's part of the review process as well. We've always looked at how the advisory panels model evolves, and that's why they're reviewed every single term to make sure it's still fit for purpose, meeting the governing body's priorities and interests, budget requirements, and hearing from those diverse voices. Thanks.
Councillor Watson and then Councillor Stewart.
Just a brief comment, if that's okay, Mr. Mayor, not a speech, but I was just following on from Councillor Lee, not on the ethnic story, but on the Heritage Advisory Panel. I would just point out the glaring irony that at a time when there's never been more interest in Auckland's heritage, vis-a-vis what that plan change is doing to our special character, that we announce a decision to withdraw or cancel or ditch the Heritage Advisory Panel. It doesn't seem to be particularly good timing to me. What has emerged through that plan change is a degree of expertise and interest from big swathes of Auckland, and not just people who happen to live in Birkenhead Point or Devonport, but from right across the board who appreciate Auckland's heritage and wants to hold on to it. So I would strongly urge you, if that's possible, Mr. Mayor, to reconsider the ditching of the small but expert grouping that has, attempted to keep some oversight over Auckland's heritage. I would just say that it's needed now more than ever, would be my view. Thank you.
Okay, well, I'll take that on board, for both the comments of you and your friend. I've had quite a bit to do with this over the years. Well, I live in a heritage building, or one of mine is, and I'm an approved builder for NZHPT. But I was going, seeing as we're in the competition for little witty stories as a result of Councillor Lee, some years ago, my consulting engineering business here got won the job of arranging the permits and everything to pull down His Majesty's Theatre, which was, I'm sure, Mr. Wilson will be suddenly poised to write about this as another Philistine. But it was just a job. I didn't have a view on it, but we went through the process. And at the time, the then mayor, who was Dame somebody or other, very famous Dame, I can't remember her name, that's right. She campaigned wildly about how bad this was, but she was also trying to get the another one up the road up. And so she got up at 5 a.m. to give us the permit to pull it down. And then came back at 9 o'clock along with the people to oppose it. Very good. And it was a dreadful old building, actually, because I remember when I was young, one time Mum and Dad had enough money to take me to the theatre, to My Fair Lady, and we went in there and I got sat down behind a post. So I didn't see My Fair Lady, I saw this post, and years later I was able to drive the digger to pull that bloody post down. So there you are. Sorry about being hilarious, not hilarious. Privilege. Okay, I'll take notice of that. Sharon Stewart, Shane Henderson, Chris Darby, and a vote.
Yeah, no, I was just going to support Councillor Walker with the heritage as well, and for some of the reasons of which you just mentioned. But do we know how much it actually costs us for all these panels, and how many people are on each of the panels, and how many staff members are looking at? Because I think all this is important.
Well, that's a very good point, and that was one of the reasons I was trying to reduce them, because you could actually find that we needed one for Nepalese and left-handed fiddlers, banjo players and other people. What is the cost of a panel?
304,000.
Eh?
304,000. For each panel.
Total or each? Okay, we'll put a cap on the whole bloody cost and we can add one in within the same price. I'll give it a bit of thought. So I'll look into it and I'll get some further information from staff. Okay, but we haven't killed it off yet. But I am trying to give out a message of restraint. Thank you for that, Councillor Henderson.
Yeah, thanks. I'll be brief, just a couple of brief comments. Just thanks, Councillor Ferry, for your hard work on this. And I just want to acknowledge Councillor Kathy Casey, who was always so passionate about this kind of area. I'm really excited to be involved in the Youth Advisory Panel again. I'm still the youngest councillor, just quietly. But I am pretty keen to sort of start working on more of a zonal representation. So we've got one from east, one from west, one from north, etc., right? And then encouraging our young people to have a good relationship with the councillors within their zone, and if they want, local boards as well, so that we've got a really close relationship with our youth, so that we get those sort of voices across. Just in terms of any proposed heritage panel, I have to say, we already have a panel that bends over backwards to look after the interests of special character zones, and we're sitting in it right now. So we don't need any more.
Very good point.
I don't know about that.
Yeah, what? You've got the governing body, what do you want? Hello, we're obviously going to get through to the end of the day before I have the youth, a scrap between the youth and the heritage. Councillor Darby, can you bring some rationality to this madness?
Question for Victoria. Victoria, when you looked at your review and you looked at the Heritage Panel, were you confident that the Heritage Panel was addressing its full terms of reference, or was it dwelling a lot on built heritage and not looking at cultural heritage, archaeological heritage and scientific heritage and all the other, areas that should be addressed under the heritage label? What did you find there when you looked at that?
Through the chair, thank you for that question. The focus of the Heritage Advisory Panel in the last term, and bearing in mind it was a really truncated term, was around central government's legislation, and so national policy statement, urban development, and the plan change special character. So that the work of the heritage team and the interests of the panels, that was what was driving that conversation. So this advice to not re-establish the Heritage Advisory Panel at this time comes from the heritage team, in that they are focused on Plan Change 78, and obviously the panel's already inputted into that. And because of where it's sitting in the process, there's no further opportunity for them at this point to input into that work. That's not to say that there isn't extremely valuable heritage conversations to be going on in exactly the spaces you're suggesting, but just whether there's other engagement mechanisms that we could use besides a formal body, a formal advisory panel providing strategic advice, because what the heritage team are dealing with is that Plan Change 78. So any strategic advice is sitting in that space. But we could definitely, and we've discussed investigating other channels to make sure that we're still getting that engagement with that important community of interest, just not recommending it's a formal panel.
Okay, leave that one there. And just a quick comment, Mayor, I like these changes. Having sat on the City Centre Advisory Board, now called the City Centre Advisory Panel, and the recommendation that elected members do not vote. They participate, they observe and participate, but they don't vote. I personally don't think that any elected member that is part of a panel should be in a position of leading it or voting, because there's a conflict there. There's an immediate conflict. Either we're going to give it over genuinely to Aucklanders who are chosen to be part of the panel, and then provide advice back to us. But I think when you temper it with the voting power of an elected member, I think there's a conflict there. And I think that probably needs to be looked at.
Okay, thanks for that. I agree with your sentiments. I'll allow Councillor Walker a supplementary, but just...
Yes,
while you're at
just
it,
addressing that last issue, there is no pecuniary interest on the Heritage Panel. I don't receive any additional income. There is no conflict of interest. It is purely a liaison role. So you go there as an observer. Further to that, I would just suggest that it would have been really great if there had been a report about this in the agenda around the Heritage Panel, of which I think there is no mention. So I'm bringing that to the attention of the officers. And further to that, for the record, over the period of time that the Heritage Panel was in place, and Councillor Lee will attest to this, of course, there was no Plan Change 78. But the Heritage Panel still had business to do, dealing, as I pointed out earlier, with scheduled heritage buildings, of which there are a number around Auckland, and of which there are many that are under threat, and of which there are a number of which that we are reliant on philanthropy, goodwill on the part of developers and others to secure those buildings, because this council does not have the funding to do that. So were it not for the fact that we have people in the community to interact with, we would have lost a significant amount of heritage. And that panel, in a small way, a very small way, provides some leverage to that. And I would suggest that if it is possible to have a report, perhaps on the part of panel members, who, as I mentioned earlier, are very competent and many of whom are expert in their field. And that also includes matters to do with iwi, of which the panel encompasses, and archaeology and other things. Then we might have something of substance to go on, rather than what I would suggest is rather limited. But I do not want to be too critical here, Mr. Mayor. Suffice to say that I'm rather disappointed with the way this is being handled. Thank you.
Okay, well, I'll refer your concerns to the Richard Hills Planning Committee, and they can review whether or not they would feel that it was their performance was encouraged or supported. I'm going to let Councillor Ferry finish off a little bit. Do you really want another go, Councillor Lee?
Just very briefly.
Please, very briefly. You guys have been on and on
Mr.
for
Mayor,
ages.
in terms of Councillor Darby's point about archaeology, during the 6 years I was chairing the Heritage Advisory Panel, and I'm certainly not volunteering for that role, but we did deal with archaeology. There's not a lot going on at the present time in Auckland, but we received regular reports on the very important archaeological work associated with the Eastern Busway, mainly in the very culturally sensitive Panmure Mount Wellington area, relating to those old past sites of Makoia and Maui Naina. We also had presentation from underwater archaeologists from the Underwater Heritage Group, and also work related to the excavation of the oldest known trading sailing vessel found at Kuiper Heads, the schooner Daring, and the panel was able to, through myself, write to the Prime Minister to persuade Heritage New Zealand to be more cooperative in the private person, John Street, who paid for its excavation and rescue and restoration. So the panel covers more than just built heritage as such.
Well, I'm going to refer that to Councillor Hill's panel for his comment, and because a lot of that's covered under planning, under the change as we've had already. I just want to make one little comment about the Rural Advisory Panel. You'll note that I have put forward the 2 rural councillors, and we had suggested that they don't meet in Auckland, they meet alternatively in Rodney and in Franklin, because there's no point having a rural panel that meets in an urban setting. And so that's the agreement, and Councillor Baker will host it one time and Councillor Sayers will host the next one. I think it's a very good solution. I'll allow this to be summed up by Councillor Ferry, and then we're going to vote on it.
Thank you very much. So I would just note that I guess I'm new to this table, but I would expect that when people are debating something, they are addressing it to the other elected members and not to members of staff. And I think that that's a really important principle that we should abide by when we're being quite forceful in the way that we speak. So I did just want to note that first up. So there was a review of the Heritage Advisory Panel, which was conducted last term, as they're all reviewed, and there is a document on that. I was not on the last governing body, but my understanding is I think that those were made available, but we can make that available again, that's fine. And I support the point that's been made by the staff member that the advice was to not go on with it this term, but to potentially look at it again in the future. And some of the reason for that is that the plan change process, basically all the people who are on the panel have submitted to that plan change process. And that's the main piece of work that they would be giving advice to governing body on. So they would also be submitters on the plan change. So that's actually quite tricky to manage in terms of that aspect. There's also been some points raised about the expertise of people on other panels. I'd just like to point out to my governing body colleagues The purpose of the panels, particularly the what we refer to as the demographic rather than the sector panels, is actually twofold. So one is to provide advice to us as the governing body and to the Mayor on issues that we may miss because we don't have lived experience or expertise in those particular areas, okay? And because those areas are often underrepresented in our formal processes and indeed at this table itself and in local boards too, potentially. The other part of it is for them to give us advice on how, as an organisation, council can engage better directly with those communities as well. So I would just put that across to you that there are two purposes there for the demographic ones in particular, and that what we're looking for out of the members of these panels is that they're operating in more of a trustee space than a delegate space. Governing body members may be familiar, I've mentioned this before, it goes back to my politics degree, which was a very long time ago, and I don't get to mention it very often, but today it is relevant, and I will revel in that, because a trustee is someone who's been put in a position because they are trusted to make good decisions and give good quality advice. A delegate is someone who is there on behalf of and expected to go back and forth with their community. Now, our roles span both, and we go back and forth between them at different times and in different processes. With these members of the advisory panels, we're going to try to be super extra clear this time around. They are there in a trustee role because there have been some messy stuff around them being seen as delegates from their community or from particular parts of their community. So some of that's about protecting them, but it's also about being really clear about what the role is. I'd also note that Member Lee, you mentioned not much archaeological work at the moment. There's actually a lot happening around the Maunga, and in Poketapapa there's a whole lot of Kāinga Ora redevelopment, which is, they've got archaeologists working with them on the sites. So, that work does continue. Finally, I would just draw people's attention to the seniors panel commentary that's in the report. So the seniors panel have signed off on the age-friendly plan, and the idea is to move them into more of a space of potentially being more like oversight of a specific plan that they've been involved in and which now applies to council. We're going to trial that basically with them and see how that goes, and that's why I put my hand up to be the liaison council for seniors, also acknowledging that sometimes it's a bit sensitive when the Mayor has to choose an appropriate councillor to be the one to liaise with the seniors panel, so I thought I'd just take that mess away from him and put my hand up and volunteer. I'm seniors adjacent at this point in my life. So there is some intention with this term to kind of evolve some of the panels where they're interested to do that and see what that new space might look like. And potentially, obviously we want to get their input through the annual budget and also through the long-term plan, but potentially after that to work on what terms of reference for each panel might look like. And that would be a really good opportunity to have a conversation about, do we bring the heritage panel back into the equation now that the plan changes are through? Do we add some other lenses? Are there some, different ideas that we could do? So definitely very open to how this will evolve over the next 3 years. I hope that puts people's minds at ease. Thank you.
Thank you. This has been moved by Councillor Ferry and seconded by myself. I'll put the thing to endorse the Mayor's proposal to establish demographic and sector advisory panels. All those in favour, please say aye. To the contrary,
Aye.
carried. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. I can feel the home stretch coming.